Hello, my name is Norm Johansson from the AWS SDK and Tools team, where I work on the .NET SDK and Visual Studio Toolkit. In this screencast, I'm going to demonstrate how to launch Nerd Dinner, an ASP.NET MVC web app using SQL Server on Amazon RDS and deploy with AWS Elastic Beanstalk. Nerd Dinner is an open-source ASP.NET MVC application that helps nerds and computer people plan get-togethers. It's also a great sample to show how to take a typical .NET web application and move it to AWS. To get started, I'm going to go to Nerd Dinner's Codeplex site and download the source. Now let me unzip the source. Once that is done, I'll open the solution in Visual Studio. In the app data folder is a SQL Server data file. I need to script this database so I can recreate the database in Amazon RDS. To do that, I'm going to go to Visual Studio Server Explorer and attach the database. Now that it is attached, I can right-click on it and select Publish to Provider. Select my database, enter the file path, leave everything here at its defaults, and now push Finish to script the database. Now I'm going to create a SQL Server instance using the toolkit. To do this, I'm going to right-click on the Amazon RDS node and select Launch DB Instance. Here I have a list of different database types I can create with Amazon RDS, including 3 different flavors of SQL Server. I'm going to go ahead and select SQL Server Standard Edition. Next, I'll set the database instance size to small, then set the database identifier to nerddb, and the master username to SA, which is the database admin, and the password to test. Here I can change the default port used by SQL Server. If you want to connect to the database server from your local network, then you need to make sure any firewalls you are behind allow traffic from the port you select. I'm going to use the default security group and default parameter group. Notice the checkbox here about adding your current CIDR. RDS databases are kept behind a firewall, and there are 2 ways to allow access to the database. The first way is by adding a CIDR permission like this to the RDS security group. This will allow you to connect to the database from your local machine. The other way is to allow EC2 security groups access, which is how our deployed applications from Beanstalk will access the database through the firewall. For now, I'm going to leave this unchecked so I can show later how to add permissions to my security group. Here we can set up our backup policy and the maintenance window when any modifications I set up for the database instance will be applied and system patches will be installed. Here is the final review page. Everything looks good, so I'm going to launch this instance. We can see the database instance added to the AWS Explorer, and if we right-click on the database instance and select View, we can get more information about it, including its status and its endpoint once it is available. It will take a few minutes for the SQL Server instance to become available. For this demo, I'm going to skip ahead. Now that the database instance is available, I can create a database for Nerd Dinner to use. Now, since this is a SQL Server database instance, I can actually use any SQL Server tool that I like to create the database. I'm going to use the toolkit to create the database because it has an extra check to see if the database instance is accessible through the AWS firewall, and if not, help us make it accessible. So I'm going to right-click on my database instance and select Create SQL Server Database. You can see the toolkit failed to get through the AWS firewall and is prompting to give permission to my machine's CIDR so I can get through the firewall. Now, if your IP is dynamic, you can specify a range with the CIDR notation. For example, if you know the first 3 bytes of your IP address is always constant and just the last 3 bytes change, you can change the CIDR to look like this, which tells the firewall only to match on the first 24 bits in the IP address. Keep in mind though, this will allow more IP addresses access to your database, leaving only the database instance's username and password as your protection level from those IP addresses. So use this feature cautiously. Now I can enter my password and database name. I can see the newly created database was added to Visual Studio Server Explorer, and we can work with it like any other SQL Server database. For example, I can add a table. To run the Nerd Dinner schema script, I'm going to use SQL Server Management Studio. I'll bring up the Connect dialog box, and for the server name, I'll go back to the toolkit and copy the endpoint. Enter my username and password and push connect. Now I'm going to open the database script that I previously created. Select the right database to run it on, and then push execute. Now the database is all set up for the Nerd Dinner application to use. Before I deploy Nerd Dinner, I need to update the connection string. I'm going to open the connectionstrings.config file and update the connection string to our new database. I'm not going to worry about the application services and just update the Nerd Dinner entities connection string. For the data source value, I can copy the endpoint from the RDS view. Set initial catalog to the database I just created and set the username and password. To deploy, right-click the Nerd Dinner web project and select Publish to AWS. On the top here, I can select the account and region to use, and down below are the options to deploy with. AWS Elastic Beanstalk is first in this list, which I'm going to select. The other options use our CloudFormation deployment, which is covered in a previous screencast. Beanstalk consists of applications, which have a collection of application versions. An application version is a zip file of the application stored in Amazon S3. In the .NET Beanstalk containers case, The zip file is a Microsoft Web Deploy archive that Visual Studio will create as part of the deployment. On the application screen, I can set a name or just leave it at its default, which is the Visual Studio project name. I can optionally add a description. The toolkit also supports Beanstalk's Git incremental deployment feature, although it hides the complexity of creating the Git archive, so all I need to do to take advantage of this is to leave this checkbox checked. This initial deployment will be a full push, but future redeployments will only need to send the files that have changed. Beanstalk applications also have a collection of environments. An environment represents an application version running on AWS resources. I'll set the environment name. Notice this auto-populates the environment URL. I'll check that the URL is available. Looks like it is available, so I'll push next. Here we can set the instance size of the EC2 instances, which I'm going to leave at micro. I have a key pair set, which is optional and will allow me to remote desktop into the EC2 instances for the environment. The rest of these options I'm going to leave blank and push next. If the toolkit detects RDS instances running, it will add this database security group page to the wizard. By checking the RDS security group I assign my database instance to, it allows EC2 instances created in the EC2 security group used by this environment access through the firewall to the database instance. Now I can do a final review and push deploy to begin the deploy process. In the output window, we can see the progress of the deployment. Once the environment is created, the environment view is displayed. It will take a few minutes for the initial deployment to finish. Redeploys, as I will show, happen much quicker. I'm going to fast forward while this deploys. Now that the environment status is healthy, I can click on the URL to view the application. With the application running, it is time to host a dinner. I can't use the register user feature because for this demo, I didn't set up the application services database that we skipped in the connection strings file. So I will log on using Gmail. Set my title. Set the event date to the first day of summer. Add a description. Address will be downtown Seattle. And my contact info will be 555-555-5555. And push save. And now our nerd dinner is set. Now I'm going to go check my SQL Server database to make sure it really is being used. And there is the dinner I set up. Now looking at the environment view, I can see the events coming from my environment. I can also get a quick glimpse of some of the CloudWatch metrics being produced from the Beanstalk environment. There won't be much metric data right now since the environment just launched. I can also see all the resources that are a part of this environment. In order for Nerd Dinner to handle running on multiple machines, I need to enable session stickiness, which I can do in the Load Balancer tab. I'm also going to set the minimum instances to 2 and apply the changes. This will put the environment in an update state. I can also click the Connect button to remote desktop into an EC2 instance in the environment. Keep in mind, EC2 instances used in Beanstalk can be torn down and recreated throughout the lifetime of the environment, so don't make changes to an instance that you expect to persist. Logging on like this is mainly useful for debugging purposes, like inspecting where the application was deployed at. Now I'm going to make a small change and redeploy to the environment. I'm going to find the home view and look at the index page. I believe we can meet for lunch as well, so I'll update the Find Dinner label to Find Dinner or Lunch. I'm going to right-click on the project again, and now I have the option to republish to my environment. This allows me to skip going through the wizard and just redeploy to the environment with the same settings as I had last time I deployed. If I wanted to change something like turn off incremental deployment, I could go back through the wizard, but now I'm just going to click deploy. We can see in the output window that just the index ASPX page was uploaded. And now in the environment view, we can see the status has changed to update, which should just last a few seconds. Now it has gone back to healthy, and if I click on the link, I can see my change. Now if I want to revert to a previous application version, I can right-click on the application node in the AWS Explorer and select View Status. Then click the Versions tab, and I can see a list of application versions that have been created. I'll select the original version and push Publish Version. Here I have Use an existing environment with my new environment selected, so I'll just go ahead and push Next. I've already set up my RDS instance, so I can skip this page. Once again, I can review and push Deploy. Looking back on the environment view, I can see the status has gone to update. I will wait till it goes back to healthy. Now that it is healthy, I'll click the URL. And we can see the label has reverted to its original text. Before I end this screencast, I want to show a final point about RDS security groups. I'm going to double-click the RDS security group that I used for the database instance. Here in the permissions section is the CIDR permission I gave earlier so I could connect to the database locally, and the EC2 security group permission, which is what is allowing my Beanstalk's EC2 instance to access the SQL Server database. From here, I can add more or remove permissions. Thanks for watching this screencast. For more information, you can visit aws.amazon.com/elasticbeanstalk or aws.amazon.com/Visual Studio. If you have comments or suggestions, we would love to hear from you on our forums at forums.aws.amazon.com and select the .NET Development category.